I'd like to acknowledge the Taranata Panir, Paninaher and Lita Myrena clans of the Stony Creek Nation on whose land this podcast is made. I recognise Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the original owners of this island who have cared for this country for over 60,000 years, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded, and I'm grateful to live, work and play on this beautiful country. Hello and welcome to the podcast, From Experience, the Grief Collection. I'm your host, Bianca Welsh, a mum, a lost mum, a restaurateur with a behavioural science degree and a proclivity for all things trauma, grief and mental illness. So, why would I do a grief podcast? Grief is the one certainty in life, the one thing we will all face, the loss of someone or something that we love. As the great wordsmith that is Nick Cave wrote to a fellow griever, if we love, we grieve. That's the deal. That's the pact. End quote. Yet we rarely talk about it. We're never prepared for it, but perhaps we can never be prepared for it. I wasn't, but I hope that hearing other people's stories might make the dark depths feel a little less lonely and the healing journey a little less daunting. I'm curious what's brought you here today. Comfort? Ideas and resources on ways to grieve and heal? Maybe you're trying to understand a loved one going through something similar. Whatever it is, I'm glad you're here. I hope that after listening to our guest today, you'll feel a fraction lighter, you might feel seen, or simply comforted that you're not alone. Please note this episode discusses infant and baby loss as well as the death of a child. If this is too much for you today, perhaps come back another time. If you feel distressed or need help, please reach out to a loved one or someone you feel safe with. Suggestions of resources are listed in the show notes. For those that know Diana and myself, we recorded this episode last year in December 2025, in case you're wondering why some of the dates and birthdays mentioned don't add up. Today's guest is Diana Butler OAM, a Tasmanian humanitarian whose work has changed lives far beyond our island. As the founder of Care for Africa, Diana has spent decades advocating for children and communities in Tanzania, turning compassion into action and building lasting pathways to education, health and hope. Awarded the Order of Australia Medal for her service, she balances her leadership of Care for Africa with a clinical health career and works as an after-hours nurse manager at the Launceston General Hospital in Tasmania, bringing her health experience into her international aid work. Diana's story is one of quiet determination, deep humanity, and the belief that meaningful change often begins with one person simply choosing to care.
Oh, you make me cry.
And Di, you are one of my personal heroes, so welcome.
Sorry, I get quite emotional. Thank you, Bianca. That's beautiful to hear.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Listeners would know, if they've listened to our first episode, mine and James's, of how important you've been in my journey, and I'm very honoured to have you here today to talk about your journey. And so let's start with your beautiful Tom and what happened with your first beautiful boy.
Oh, Bianca. So my waters broke. I was 24 years old and I was living on a farm, and I remember going into hospital. It was the most exciting moment of my life. And what made it so special is that my family, where I came from, I didn't really fit in and I just longed for my own family. Anyway, I gave birth to this most beautiful little boy. He was perfect in every way. He had beautiful big brown eyes like yours, Bianca. And I remember when he was born, I held him and I wouldn't let him go. And the midwife said, "We've got to take your baby." And I clung tightly to him because it was just my greatest joy in life. And then they took him away and they came back sort of an hour later or so. They said, "You've got a very sick child." And I said, "But he'll be all right." I remember saying that as clear as a bell. They said, "They don't know." And I said, "No, he will be all right, won't he?" Eventually they said, "You've got a very sick child." And I was in this total disbelief. And I said, "I need to see my baby. I need to see my little boy." He was ventilated. Valerie Hewitt, the paediatrician, she was amazing. And she was caring for him. And they said, "Look, we'll try and get him to Melbourne." He's got what they call a diaphragmatical hernia, where his diaphragm hadn't fully developed. and his abdominal contents had actually grown into his thoracic space. And sorry, I don't know, 40 years later, I'm quite emotional even talking about it and going through this journey. Long and short of it, he wasn't strong enough and he couldn't cope with the pressures to go to Melbourne. So they brought the team up from Hobart, and he had a surgeon in Hobart, Dr. Carruthers, and he was ready to operate on Tom, and he didn't make it. I'll never forget this moment, just begging this doctor in Hobart, please, can you save my child's life? I'll give my life for my child's life. And you would associate with that only too well. And a thought flashed through my mind as well. Like, I remember reading stories about war, and you would often find the mother dead and the child alive, and how mothers sacrifice their lives. And it's something innate in us as mothers to put our lives before our own child. And, yeah, they gave him to me, and I held him, and he did. He took his last breath in my arms, and it's a moment that, you know, I will always carry. The hardest thing was that it was never really spoken about. He would be 40 in December, and there's not a day, as I always say, that I don't long for him, don't wonder what he's doing. I have this sort of mixed feeling as, you know, he's an adult, but I still hold him in my arms as though he's my baby. And I had that moment of seeing his little eyes when he was born, and his beautiful soft brown hair, and this miraculous creation. And just hardest thing I've ever done is to hand my own child to someone else and never to see him again.
Oh, Di, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what that would have been like for him to take his last breath in your arms. Your description of wanting to trade and to give anything for him to live, like, I can feel that. Oh, deep in my bones, that feeling of like you'd trade places in a heartbeat if you could.
And you know that only too well. You have had that lived experience, and you beg for your own child's life as a mother. And you know the hardest thing is that there's mums with this early childhood loss, they haven't had a chance. You know, and I believe that every child comes to us for the longing of life, to live life, to experience. And these children, they haven't had that chance to experience any of life.
Mm. But what he did experience was love, and your love in the womb, and then those only a few hours did he live?
Yeah, he lived for 8 hours.
I'm sure he would have felt that deeply.
And I remember talking to one of the midwives that was on in neonatal ward 4N of the LGH not long ago, and she said to me, these children come to this earth and they experience nothing but love. They're the most loved children that will ever be. And so there are your words, and it's so true. And is there not a comfort in that? There's some huge comfort.
Absolutely. Di, can you explain a little bit about the difference of the experience back then and that inability or the not feeling the allowance to talk about it like we do today? The space has changed even in my short, Herb will almost be 4 years of experience joining the club you don't want to be a part of, which is the Baby Loss Club. And there's still a lot more conversations that need to be had. There's still a lot more awareness and understanding. But what was it like back then, 40 years ago?
It was a lonely journey. No one knew how to handle me. And I remember my mother in Hobart, I rang her that night. And I said, I've got a really sick little boy, can you come up? And she said, I'll come up in the morning. And, I remember saying to her, can you help me with his ashes? And she couldn't. And I still have his ashes. And it's a blessing in disguise because no one could help me bury his ashes, put them to rest. So I was that alone, that there was no one. And I still have his box in my chest of drawers, and they will travel now wherever I go. After he was born, I was put back into the maternity ward, and it was just this torment of these babies crying. And no one seemed to want to know. So I did sign myself out of hospital. And there are a lot of stories that I could tell about the alone journey, and that's what made it so hard because I was only 24. A lot of my friends weren't married. No one had lived through this, and if they had, they didn't talk about it, and no one knew what to say. And, gosh, I remember one night I had a whiskey with my husband, and then I had another one, and then I had another one. It was the first night's sleep I'd had. And I look at people that drink a lot and I understand why. Because the next morning I looked up at that bottle of whiskey and I thought that pain can go. I don't have to share that alone. That bottle of whiskey actually kept me company and it gave me real insight. I do remember walking down Launceston. There was a couple of weeks after Tom had died and seeing someone cross the road because they didn't know how to cope with me. I have 3 photos of him and I've guarded them with my life. I've actually taken them on my phone as well. But there were no handprints. I would love a piece of his hair, but, it was a sign of the times and it was just stuff that you just got on with life. But I actually really battled with the grief. I think because my longing for him was so deep.
And I can, without those memory-making pieces that we now have, the lock of his hair, copious amounts of photos, but they're never enough. And I remember after he was taken to the funeral home when we left hospital, I remember thinking, why didn't I take more videos? Which is a privilege that we have that opportunity and that technology now that we can so easily take that. And my heart just aches. My heart aches for you and for all the women that never got that opportunity back then because it just wasn't something that was done. Did you stay with him after he had died for long?
No.
Not at all. They just took him away.
His last breath, and look at me, his last breath, I never saw him. Never. No. And it was just not what you did. And, I would have loved to have held him one more time. And I don't know whether you still say the same. You want to hold him one more time like Herb. And I still long just one more time. I would love to have looked at his little hands and his little feet. But I can't do that. But I was grateful for that moment and I did have a little bit of life with him. And I do look at mothers before me, the generation before. So many mothers didn't even see their children. And if there is nothing we can learn from each other.
Absolutely. Did you name him as soon as he was born?
Yes. Yeah. We actually had him christened.
Oh, wow.
I know. That was amazing at 3:00 in the morning.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I must admit, Bianca, and I've got to thank you for this, that you've given me permission to be more open about Tom because it's been such a hidden, silent grief. And on his birthday this year, on the 6th of December, I put a post up and I took it down. And I put it up and I took it down. And it was because of you, Bianca, that I was able to do that. So what you have done through your work has actually given me permission to share his life more, and that is part of my healing.
Thank you, Di. It means so much to me. So much to me. We fortunately have crossed paths before this.
Yeah.
You were the angel that came into the hospital room when I was in there for really bad food poisoning. Yeah. And the registrar had tissued my IV drip, and you came in and just deftly fixed it, and I was better within half an hour, and I always held you in extremely high regard since then. And your beautiful stepdaughter used to work with us.
Yeah, Zoe.
And I'm so, so grateful. I didn't know this part of your journey and story, and it wasn't until another lost mum said, oh, you should go and see Di after we lost Herb. And I reached out to you, and you so kindly had me around for a cup of tea, and I just spilled the whole story to you. And I will never forget, because it's one of the really important parts of my journey, that you just so confidently looked at me and said, you will find your purpose.
Yep. I'm a great believer in such shattering loss. It's almost as though we're like a flower pot, and it cracks that soul open and there is nothing left. You're raw. But then that's where the light gets in, and that's where we find something more. We have to grieve, and we have to go through that process. There is no other way. But it actually gives meaning and purpose to life. You either do that or you become embittered by it.
So, Di, straight after Tom had died and you were trying to navigate that pain, was knowing your purpose instant for you,
No.
or did it? How did you navigate the next little while?
Well, I was actually incredibly blessed, if I can use that word. So I went back to my obstetrician for my 6-week check, and I was pregnant.
Wow.
I know. Wow. I know. And that was the greatest gift, was to be able to conceive again.
That's an incredible just
Healing.
physical feat for your body that you just had given birth, and all the trauma, and then
I was pregnant.
that's remarkable.
And it was the most beautiful time. It was Benjamin, and he's beautiful. But I had a lot of nightmares, as you would have had. I remember going into labour with Benjamin, Bowie, I call him, and I burst into tears. Well, I had this tough midwife, and she said, oh, for goodness sake, get on and have your labour, and your baby's going to be all right. And she slapped me around the face, not literally, but metaphysically, and she was so stern.
She didn't know your story.
Yeah, she knew my story.
Did?
Yeah, and she was a strict. She said, you're going to concentrate on your labour and you're going to have a baby and this baby's going to be healthy. No, she was amazing. She pulled me into line. I was a blithering idiot. And I sort of thought, oh. Yeah, and then 19 months after that I had Jono.
Wow.
And I just loved motherhood. And I had Harry 3 years later, and I never, ever lost that desire, and I still have it. I couldn't now, but to have a child. I just long to have another child. And I don't know whether it's because of my loss of Tom or whether it is part of me. I'm sure that Tom has been part of creating that thought process. So, no, I sort of didn't find my purpose, and I sort of had an inkling that I knew I wanted to do something, but I wanted to be a mother, and I threw myself into mothering 100%.
Did you find it traumatic to then continue to have boys? Did they all remind you of Tom, or did it feel different?
Felt different.
Yeah.
Everyone. And it's quite interesting. Birthing was different then, but all my other 3 boys, they were all sort of taken away straight away. So I didn't have skin-to-skin contact, and I didn't have baby to breast. It was always birthing on your back, and it was just do it. Whereas with Tom, I had him, which is quite interesting. I often look back and reflect on that, and I think I innately must have known that there was something wrong with Tom, whereas my other boys, I was just quite relaxed to let them go. But I do remember with Harry, he was an incredibly quick birth. He was a 20-minute. I know, it was a bit bizarre, but anyway, I was not well. I put oxytocin up, and from the time they put that up to he was out was 20 minutes. So I passed out. Harry, he didn't get the lung compressions, so he went to neonatal ICU, and he couldn't breastfeed from me. And I said, I don't want him to have formula. I said, I will express, and he'll have my own through a nasogastric tube. And this was in the old QV. And do you know there was 3 flights, still floors between us, and do you know not once did I miss a feed of his.
Wow.
And every time I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever, because the midwives would say to me, Diana, you've got to sleep tonight. And I said, yeah, I'll sleep. And then I'll wake up. I thought, my baby needs feeding. I'd go down and I said, oh, he's just stirring. That is a bizarre phenomenon, but he never once had formula.
Wow. So are you almost, I don't know if this is the right way to phrase it, would you almost be grateful for the experience of Tom and that shaped the way you parent and the way you mothered?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, because you would feel this too, because you know your children are your greatest gifts, but then life is fragile and we're not all immortal. We think we are, and it happens to someone else, but when it happens to you, so you put your heart and soul and you're present with your children and you genuinely love and want them. And now I've got 3 incredible men and I just love them like babies. I just want to hold them in a nest. It's terrible.
Before we talk about then you finding more purpose in your life out on top of being a mother, was it your first grandchild? Was it quite...
Oh.
Did it brought a lot of Tom's experience back, did it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was very triggering and it just came out of the blue. He was actually, little Bruce looked a bit like Tom.
Oh, wow.
And I saw him and I just went down this dark rabbit hole out of all this joy, and I was trying to hide it from Kirsty and Bowie and the family, and I just sort of plummeted like real PTSD. And Bruce had a little event in hospital, and so he ended up in neonatal ICU, little cardiac event, and I just triggered everything.
Were you expecting that at all?
No, not at all. Here you are, you're just about to receive this most beautiful grandchild, another gift that comes to you, and then whammo, it just triggered it from nowhere. Nothing prepared me. And I remember one of the midwives, I went to her and I said, I've got to talk to you. And I just broke down. I said, what is all this about? Where's all this come from? I can't. She was amazing, amazing. But it just made me realise how deep that loss was for me, and I actually still hadn't dealt with it. So I went to this counsellor. I only went to her once, and I said, look, I still haven't resolved Tom's grief. And I think there was a big part of it, Bianca, that I just got on with life. I had 3 children. It was such a lonely journey. And she said to me, Diana, you get yourself the most beautiful book and you write that story. And do you know it was the most painful thing? I wept and I wept and I wept. And I wrote every part of the story about Tom's birth and his passing and the times afterwards. And a lot of my grief was because no one wanted to know about it, and I was so lonely, and he didn't matter to the rest of the world. No one cared. And I wrote that, and that was a great healing for me.
Wow, that is amazing.
So dear little Bruce has helped me with my grief with my Tom.
Beautiful Bruce. I absolutely love his name. I love that he's called Bruce.
Oh, he's gorgeous. He's just adorable.
What was the experience like with your husband at the time and when you lost Tom?
Yeah, look, he grieved as well. And it was hard for him because his friends didn't know how to cope with him either. So it was a sad time for both of us.
I can only imagine how difficult it would have been back then, because even James struggles now to talk about it. Most of his mates wouldn't really ask questions or bring it up. They would sometimes acknowledge his loss only if it came up very explicitly. So I can only imagine how different it was and how much lonelier it was back then.
Absolutely. And I don't think Michael had any support because I didn't have any, and his was much less, and men just got on and did their work.
After Tom, did you ever feel it okay to talk about how many children you have and to include him in that number?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Oh, Bianca, that is the hardest question to answer, because I want to say I've got 4 children, and people say, oh, you've got 3 beautiful boys. And then I interrupt them and say, no, I've got 4 beautiful boys. But then there comes the story, and what do you do? And I'm in constant dilemma about that question is, how many children do you have?
Has it ever gotten easier as you've been able to talk about it anymore?
No. And there is a part of me that, like I'm sharing this podcast, but it's a sacred world as well, and you don't want it. I mean, here I am, but I feel sacred with you. I feel safe with you. Whereas to share it just with some random, I'm not going to say something, I don't know. And what do you do? It's too awkward. I haven't got an answer for that. But if it's with the right person, I will always tell them. But it's a story, isn't it? Whereas often in conversation, how many children have you got? I've got 3 children, then it's just part of conversation, then you move on to something else. Whereas if I tell them I've got 4 children, where's the other one? Then that becomes the big story. And also, I must say, 40 years later, Bianca, to go there, it still brings emotional pain. I've
feels like it happened yesterday.
Yep. And there is a part of me that's learned to accept that, and he belongs in my heart, and I'm allowed to have my tears and to feel, and I've given myself permission that that's okay to be like that.
I think it's hopefully really helpful to other listeners out there to hear your journey. I've spoken before about how I needed to see examples of people that have survived this incredibly terrible heartache of losing a child. And I mean, you're like the top of my pedestal. Because you've done so much with your pain and you're still here, you survived it. And I think to hear that you still struggle with that question to this day gives the rest of us who are early on in the journey allowance to feel that it's okay that we can sometimes grapple with it. And if the postie asks us and we just go, oh, just the 2 that you can see, rather than it being this awkward conversation, then that's okay, because I still find it difficult. Some days I'll have my big girl boots on and I'll be like, no, I have 3 children and 1 is not here. But there are times where I just will say 2 because it's easier, but then I feel guilty for that.
Yeah, you do feel guilty because then you're denying him, and that was one of my biggest griefs is with all that I've lost, you're yourself denying them of life because you're not acknowledging them, and that's what there's big loss around that.
It's very tricky to navigate. What was it like working in the healthcare sector? Because were you already a nurse when you lost Tom?
Yes, yeah. But I wasn't really working. I did go back half a day a week with a GP surgery, but that was quite task orientated and not really sort of delving into people's lives and getting involved with their emotional side so much. I think I was quite removed from all of that. But when I went back to nursing the Launceston General Hospital when I was 39, I really carved out my career then. So turning 40, I went back to uni, massive change in my life, and I moved into town and I just felt as though I'd lived so much in life, and I had always felt this for a long time anyway, and your pains must become your gifts. And that's what I wanted, and I was looking for a purpose-led life. And to go back to nursing after this loss of Tom has shaped my career massively. Interestingly, though, I've never worked with neonates, midwifery, or in children's ward. I actually, bizarrely, I find it too hard. I find it too triggering.
Yeah. Oh, I don't think that's bizarre at all. That makes absolute sense as to why that would be so difficult.
And I have had a few cases of early childhood loss because my earlier years were spent in the emergency department. So you'd come across these battered children or the SIDS, early loss children, and when I'm there, I go into that zone. But then it does trigger as well, and it has triggered a lot of emotion. So I know that I'm limited with how I can actually work into that space, just at the coalface of it all. Like when we met, it is so healing for me to be able to share stories. Same with Eliza and Emily. It's just beautiful. You know, we have this bond of a sacred sisterhood, and it's protected. But when you're in the coalface of it all, I find the PTSD, if I can use that term, is really triggering. So I know my limitations, that I actually couldn't sustain that in life.
That's incredible self-awareness, because I'm sure there would be plenty of people that think they need to go into those areas that are particularly triggering.
Yeah.
And think that maybe it will help, or I think that's really wise of you to know that that's not your area.
Yeah.
So then tell me about, how did Care for Africa come about?
Yeah, well, you know, Bianca, I always had a great longing to have a deeper purpose, and I love nursing, and it was sort of been one of the most amazing, still is, careers that I could have chosen. It suits my personality and the life that I've led. But I just have longed for more in life, and I've been looking for, I don't know what it is, but I've been looking for it. And it's interesting, when I moved to town and I read this book called The Rain Queen by Catherine Scholes, and it was this woman that went to Africa, and she went out to the wilds of Africa, and she wanted to find out what made the people, think and how they worked. So she stood up against the missionary philosophy, and I was intrigued by this book. I can remember it as clear as a bell. And I think, I'd love to be like this woman, but what do you do? And I was looking for it, but I wasn't actively seeking it. And then I remember when I was in the emergency department and talking to this doctor, and her father had a small 34-bed hospital in Tanzania, and she was telling me these stories, how her father would operate under candlelight, and there was no water in the hospital. And I said, we can help. There was no foreign aid, so we can help. And a group of my colleagues and nurses are great. We all rallied together and we filled a shipping container of medical aid. We raised money. Rotary sponsored us and sent this shipping container across, to this remote area in Tanzania. And curiosity, I've always been curious with life. And I was 46 and I went across, and everything was sent over was just fantastic. Cotton wool balls to beds to nurses' uniforms, gauzes, pretty basic stuff. But that's what they needed. We got water into the hospital. We put a generator for the hospital. But what happened to me was quite a pivotal moment in my life. So I went out to this community, and I will still remember this exact moment. And there are all these people, there are hundreds of people that had walked for kilometres to see this white person. And I was with Peter Hewitt, and I looked and I just broke down in tears. And I said, this is too much. And Peter just nudged me and said, stand up. And I stood up because what happened is that when I was a little girl, I used to play this because I had quite an alone childhood, and I lived in my own world, and I used to play act this, and I didn't actually understand. And this book that I read of Catherine Scholes, my loss of my Tom, and my father was an early loss. There was a lot of losses earlier on in my life as well. And I just broke down. I thought, wow, it was like my whole life had flashed in front of me. And this is why I've come here on this planet. This is why I've been born. And I stood up to those people and I looked them all in the eye and I said to them, I would help them. I said, but I don't know what to do, so you have to guide me. And there was something in my heart that changed.
Wow.
And I will honour those people to the day I leave this planet.
You're an amazing human, Di, and absolutely amazing and selfless, so incredibly selfless. So how many years have you now been?
It's 19 years, Bianca.
Wow.
19 years. And look, I give credit to the people because my greatest gift was not knowing what I was doing. So I had to listen to the people, and they know what they want. And how do you get people to have their own agency? We all want to be our own person. We all want to be the best that we can. But when people are trapped in poverty, they just survive. And you know what it's like when you're just surviving, the loss of Herb, the loss of my Tom, you are just in survival mode. You're just one foot in front of the other. That's all you do. There's a numbness. There is nothing more in your life. And I look at these people, you know, their life is harsh. They've got so much to teach us, but I can walk with the people. I have buried babies with mothers. I've rescued stolen children. You know, I've saved albinos. You know, we've developed this model, integrated model for community development. So we lift communities out of poverty. So we put in water, and then we get healthcare, and then we get education. But once you've got people educated, you actually need to build secondary industry into a community so the whole community lifts up. But amongst all of that, there are the real stories of walking with the people and sort of holding the hand of my mother as she passes over, and she knows she's going to leave those children and but you say, they're going to be all right. We're going to look after those kids. We're going to get sponsorship. They're going to have a life. And saving these children that get hunted by witch doctors and lose their body parts, I'm able to go into that pointy end of life. I do that with my work in the hospital. I can hold the hand of the dying, and that's what nurses do. And it's what I do in Africa. I go into the people's lives and I'm with them, and I'm actually part of their lives because I don't know why I was born here, and I have a beautiful, beautiful life. I've lived a lot, and I've had opportunity for amazing education. I turn the tap on and I get clean water. But I look at these people, they're no different, but they don't have that privilege, and it is a privilege. I see mothers that bury their children alone. And so Tom has opened all of that to me. And I will always say, let your pains be your gifts. So Tom has been my greatest gift in life because he's opened my soul so I can actually give to humanity.
Did you share much about Tom when you embarked on that journey about Care for Africa, that he had kind of...
No.
No.
And you know, there's a part of me that has been so private in my life. And I think that's the way that I was brought up as well. You don't talk about those things. Well, that's just what you do. You don't do that. You just get on with life.
Have those people in Tanzania given you so much resilience and taught you so much?
Oh, they have taught me so much.
And what have they taught you about grief? Because is their processing of grief and their expression of grief very different to what we see in the Western world?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They grieve well. We hide grief, but they grieve well. And I'll just share an amazing story with you. So Abdullah, my country manager, I was just about to leave for Tanzania. I was 5 hours away. I just sat down and had a shower. I'd poured a wine with Jane James and Heather Sparks. We'd finished this 5-week huge program, and Abdullah rang me and he said, Didi, he calls me Didi, he said, you need to come. It's Hadar. And I said, what's happened? He said, she's gone. I said, where? And he said, she's at the Secretary Hospital. She's gone. So he said, I need you there. Long and short of it, big story. She was 10 years old. She had drowned accidentally. And I spent the night with the family and the wailing with the women. It was such an honour. I'll always travel in Africa with a scarf. I was able to wear a scarf. And I came back to the hotel room. I asked the hotel staff to wash, because I wore a Care for Africa shirt and skirt. And then the next morning they laid her out, and there was with another little friend, Fatima. Anyway, Hadaya's mum couldn't do it, and they asked if I could go in. And they were all non-English speaking, and they're all Muslim, and it was the most beautiful experience. We were there. There were about 12 ladies. They all took their hijabs down, and it was almost like this heavenly space with these two little girls. They plaited Hadaya's hair. They painted her hands in oil, and everyone walked together and worked with love, and then wrapped her in this fine muslin and carried her out to the school bus, put her in the school bus, and she travelled with her friends to Taremi, which is 5 hours away. And they cry, they worship, they celebrate life. We run away from it, and that is just one experience. And they've taught me about grief. They don't run away from it. And I've been to many funerals over there, and particularly more children's funerals, because so many children die. But the children, they celebrate their beautiful little lives. They have an open coffin. Everyone goes round and just gives homage and respect to that beautiful life. We hide it here.
We have so far to go when it comes to this topic. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that is incredibly moving. And the celebration, I think, of that person's life, but also of their body. I remember watching movies when I was young of American shows, and they might have this open casket, and I always thought, oh my God, that is so awful. Like, why would you want to look at a dead body?
Mm.
And now, having had Herb, I could not think of not being able to say goodbye and to spend time with them before they leave this earth in that way. You rob people of being able to grieve and to just process. And I'm assuming, would for you, if you were able to maybe just have Tom for another day, to have just held him quietly whilst all the chaos had settled, and you could just be with him.
I long for that every day, Bianca, and thank you for acknowledging that. And I look at our little Hadaya, if I could have done that with him. I washed his little face, washed his little hands, put oil on his hands, just loved him like a mother and given him that respect and love. But then I am grateful for what I had, because I look at the mothers before me that didn't even have that.
In your journey, what are some of the things that have really worked for you?
look, giving myself permission to actually allow myself to have grief. His birthday on the 6th of December, I don't have to be stoic and brave and not cry. I'm allowed to weep. No, I'm not depressed. No, it's my child that I loved. And I'm allowed to hold that space, and society doesn't always give us permission to do that 40, 50 years later. People look at me and think, oh, she's mad. What's wrong with that woman? And what are the greatest lessons? Look, I think reflection and writing, talking. They talk about in psychology, psychiatry, cognitive behavioural therapy is that talking therapy, and it is so healing. Seeing you, Bianca, when you came to see me, it was so healing for me because it was a hidden grief and you've given me permission. And then I watch you on social media and I'm thinking, wow, I wouldn't be brave enough to do that. But then you do it and it actually is another part of the healing journey. So I look at what you have done. You're opening up my opportunities for grief. And so it's interesting. We think that you always learn from your elders, which we do, but then the generation before us have got so much to teach us. And that's what you've done with me, Bianca, as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Di. It honestly means so, so much to me. What are some things that come to mind that haven't worked in your journey?
Whoa. I think it's trying to do it alone. A battle with that. No man is an island. And at time I retracted that grief and I held on to it and it doesn't work because what happens, you hold that grief. Whereas sharing today is healing. I've been able to cry and I think that is the greatest for me, is to be able to share. And there is a reserve with me wanting to share, but once I'm there, you innately want to share it. And I didn't talk about, I'm going to do this podcast with Bianca about Tom. There's still that sort of hiding away with it.
I find that really fascinating with all your wisdom and incredible work and recognition for all your work and the conversations you've had with me and other lost mums. It's really interesting, but it also goes to that giving yourself permission to be whatever you feel you need, and whether that's to not talk about it and to reserve it for yourself is the permission.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a script that's written for you and it's deeply embedded in you, so it takes a lot of courage. You talk about courage and bravery, and this takes a lot of courage for me to come here. And I thought, no, Diana, you are doing this. It was just like that Facebook post, up and down, up and down.
Well, I'm incredibly grateful, and I know our listeners would be very grateful to hear your story. Is there something that you would say, if you could go back to Di when you gave birth to Tom and you let him go, you had to give him up, what would you have said to yourself with all your wisdom now to get you through? Is there something you would say to comfort yourself back then?
Well, I wish I could say he would be all right. That's what we want to believe, that life is immortal. But if I could look back on it, I would wrap my arms around myself and not have to be so stiff and rigid to survive, because we can put layers of ice around ourselves because we're hurting. Whereas to give someone, your own self, that permission to be totally vulnerable and just to truly be who you are, that's my greatest learning in life. And Tom has taught me that, and I'm still learning it, because that's really where our gifts are, is who we are. So, and don't rule it with the head. Follow your heart.
Yeah.
We've got great minds and great intellects, all of us have, but don't forget about your heart.
That's really lovely advice.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity because it's healing for me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's been my greatest pleasure. Thank you, Bianca. I'll give you a big hug. Thank you. You're just so beautiful. Thank you.
Joining me to unpack the last interview is Caroline Thain. Caroline is an occupational therapist, witness intermediary, and clinical leader working within a national youth mental health service. She has expertise in trauma-informed practice, grief and loss, clinical governance, content development and service improvement. Caroline has a special interest in media, communication and participation, and is passionate about supporting young people and families through complex challenges while helping to create systems that are safe, accessible and responsive to their needs. Caroline also brings personal lived experience of grief and loss to her work. Following the death of her stepfather during adolescence, she developed an early understanding of the profound impact that loss can have on young people and families. This experience has shaped her commitment to ensuring that conversations about grief are compassionate, honest, and grounded in hope. It has also fostered a deep appreciation for the importance of connection, support, and meaningful communication during times of adversity. Welcome, Caroline. Hello, Caroline.
Hi, Bianca. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm really well, thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining me today to discuss the beautiful and eloquent person that is Diana Butler.
Yeah, she's amazing.
And her story, she's had a huge impact on me and my journey. And I always get teary when I talk about her because she was so important in my part of processing my grief and loss journey. So what are some of the biggest things that you took away from our conversation?
First of all, I loved the personal aspect between the two of you. I could feel that emotion. That was quite special. It felt like we were witnessing it as well, listening to it. It was really lovely. I think her journey is really remarkable. And again, she was somebody else who's incredibly generous in telling her story. And I think the most powerful part was thinking about how grief can manifest over time. And how that can bring meaning, how that can bring joy in a funny way, but how it looks like over many years in a person's life. I loved how her story illustrated the enduring grief in a way that might sound strange, but it felt really beautiful around how it had really been front of mind through all these years and how it had impacted her life in really beautiful, meaningful ways. But it also told a story around rules of grief. It doesn't just end at a certain day. It continues to impact us in how we grow and different phases in our lives, and it never goes away. And I think there was something really beautiful and powerful about how that was demonstrated and illustrated in her story.
Yeah, absolutely. How everything sort of organically manifested, that it wasn't necessarily going out to find your purpose and that sort of toxic positivity that grievers can tend to really hate, that it just everything just kind of happened in a very natural way that it felt right.
Yes. Yeah, it was quite meaningful and it just happened quite organically for her.
And I think when people are on the other side of that sort of success or that sort of impact, it can be viewed as, oh God, we've all got to go out and do something quite remarkable.
Yeah.
But we don't have to.
No, not at all. And yeah, I agree. I think when a significant incident or loss or death has occurred in your life, you can sometimes move really quickly into that productive space. I need to be doing something. And it actually makes sense in terms of everything this horrific incident has occurred outside of your control. And productivity can make us feel good and can give us more meaning and things like that in our life. But that can look very different for everybody. And I think it's important to remember, we don't all have to go out and do certain things or tell our story from the rooftops or go and create foundations, or it's really about working out what is it that you need for your story and your life that's meaningful to you, and how do you want to process it and then move forward.
Yes.
I think there's that old rule about infant death, which you would know really well, Bianca, around that, they were little and therefore they weren't well known yet and therefore it's not a significant loss, which is an awful, awful stereotype. And I think it's just so untrue. And I really loved how she spoke really passionately in that space around really breaking that stigma and that how much it's impacted her life over time but how it's created where she is now. I really liked that it really dispelled that as well.
I'm in a fortunate time where we have a platform to share our experiences and we can raise awareness, whether it's in our back doorstep or if it's across the other side of the world, we can pick up someone else's story and it resonate with ours. I feel so much for mums that even Diana lamented about women that came before her that weren't even able to hold their babies. They didn't even get to see them. Devastating. And I wonder what the kind of the next generation is going to look at our time and go, gosh, what you did or didn't do and how much that's impacted, because that trauma for women 60, 70, 80 plus years ago, 40 even, and even for Diana, which was 40 years ago, the impact of her not being able to spend time with him after he had died and he's whisked away, I can't imagine what that would feel like.
Oh, yeah, devastating. And it's that old stigma that if it's not seen, then it hasn't happened. And therefore everyone just moves on and pretends it hasn't happened. It's dreadful. But no, I agree. We're lucky now to be moving in circles where infant loss and grief is really understood and really deeply understood in terms of the impact that it can have.
In your experience in the trauma world, things have changed and research has shifted in terms of how and when we talk about our traumatic experience. And I was so fascinated by Diana's experience of many, many years later, and when her first grandson was born and how much had come up for her, that someone had recommended for her to go and write down what happened to her and Tom and how cathartic that was, and probably her first proper opportunity to really talk about what had happened to her. And just the recommendation these days now is that you only really talk about it when you're ready to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think we used to do this thing where we'd sort of force people into debriefing. You must talk about the trauma right now and in this certain way. And yeah, I agree. I think trauma can present in lots of different ways, and we certainly know through lots of childhood studies the prevalence of trauma, so not just grief and loss but trauma, of course, in other forms. And so as a result, I think we're much more aware of trauma-informed ways of working. I would say sometimes we do a lot of talking about, and we can throw that term around, and I think we probably still have a way to go in terms of health more broadly can work sometimes in traumatised systems, which can impact again in how we show up and present care and service. But certainly we're much better at understanding what that means, and I think this story was an illustration of how trauma can pop back up right down the track, and how beautiful that was in terms of her healing and her journey. I thought that was, remarkable.
Do you have a recommendation for people that might be trying to help others with an experience that they're not ready to talk about, but they need to get some help?
Yeah, I think it's challenging for parents as well, I would say, or families of children and young people to recognise they might not be the primary person as well to talk to them. So I use a lot of this particular sentence that is, if it's not you, it's okay. Doesn't mean that that child or young person doesn't care deeply for you, but it might be somebody else. And so to start that curious conversation with your young person or child, or if you don't want to talk to me about it, that's okay. Who would you like to talk to about it? Because I can see that you're not sleeping, I can see that you don't want to go to school, or whatever it looks like. So then you sort of open the door rather than the other approach, which is you have to talk to me. I'm really worried about you. Please talk to me. I say that giggling because I've said that to my own children before. Because it comes from a place of, deep worry. When you see a child struggling with something, you just want to know.
Absolutely.
And it's really hard when you can see they're internalising their thoughts and you just want to know. But so I say that it's easier said than done. But I certainly think it's a really important conversation to start by saying, it's okay if it's not me. What about Auntie Sarah or, whoever? Or would you go and speak to somebody? Would you speak to the school social worker or counsellor, or would you go and speak to our doctor, or whatever that looks like? So I think it's those curious conversations, but that can be really helpful. It is really tough, I would say, for young people and children who are just ambivalent. That's a really tricky spot when they're like, I don't know, I don't care. Because that's actually Yeah, it's hard. And it's okay, I think, in those moments to trust your intuition as a family member to go, okay, well, I'm going to make the decision. We're going to go and see someone. So I think that's important in those moments while you're listening to your young person or your child, is to also trust your own intuition in that moment. Nah, doesn't feel right now.
And then for adults, I mean, how can you encourage that when you don't have the ability to kind of force them into some care?
I think, again, similarly, being curious is always easier to hear than directing someone. So it might be like, oh, look, I'm really worried about you for these reasons. So you say what you're observing, and I'm wondering, do you reckon it might help if you spoke to someone?
Yeah, I really like that approach.
Yeah.
I really like that curiosity approach.
Because it's hard, isn't it, when someone, I know I've had people say it to me before in my life, I think you should talk to someone. And my automatic response is often, I'm fine. And also you sort of left with like, why do they think I need, do I look like I'm not coping?
Especially if it's my husband telling me that. I'm like, absolutely not. What do you mean?
No.
What does that mean?
Yeah. What are you saying that for? Because, it comes from this, space of, I'm fine. I'm actually fine. I'm coping. I'm fine. But, I think it's really important to just do it with curiosity, and then it kind of opens the door for a conversation. And certainly when people have been curious with me personally, it's made me slow down and go, yeah, actually maybe. And
it kind of drops the seed in there.
Yeah.
You walk away from that conversation, or maybe a week later you might go, actually that was a good question that someone asked me.
Yeah.
Maybe I should.
Yeah. And what can hurt?
Yeah.
I also would say, as you know, people who grieve and have a significant loss, they're not all going to need formal therapy. I think that's an important thing to say as well. But those people that do, it might be that because the grief looks a little bit more complex. But I would say to them, you might meet a therapist or a counsellor and it might not be your person. And I always say, doesn't mean that therapy or counselling is wrong. It just means that they're just not the right relational fit. And so just try again.
Every single person needs to hear that. And I liken it to finding your significant other. You're not going to match with everyone.
Exactly.
So you're never always going to match with a therapist straight away. You might be lucky and you find the right fit first go. Wicked. But also there are seasons in people's lives. I've got some people in my life that maybe they've had certain therapists for a period of time.
Yeah.
And the therapy's worked amazingly for them, but now they kind of moved into a different season.
Yeah.
Maybe the therapist does certain techniques that are maybe that person's evolved and moved on from perhaps that type of therapy, and maybe they need to go and look at something else. And it's not sometimes you need to break up with your therapist.
Yeah, definitely. No, definitely.
And evolve into the next season.
Yeah.
I know that takes time and effort and sometimes money to be doing that. So you got to go back to the GP, you got to get a new referral to someone, you got to find the right person, you got to see if you fit, go through all your history again, which is always traumatic, isn't it, to go through your shopping list of problems.
Yeah.
But it's worth it if you can find the right one.
Oh, definitely. And we're all skilled in different ways, as you say. And I think some of us will be a better fit for certain things than others. And it's always the first thing I say, if this does not work for you, it's so fine. I just want you to say, and then I will refer you to someone who I think might be a better fit. So I give that permission from the start. But I think if your therapist doesn't do that or your counsellor doesn't do that, it's important that you know yourself. That's okay. You're allowed to choose. And I think choice in trauma-informed ways of working and that agency is really, really important.
I couldn't agree more. Whenever I speak to anyone who has experienced a loss in a mostly small town, i.e. Launceston context, or even Hobart, it always comes up that they always remember how people cross the road to avoid them.
Yes.
And I've experienced that. Yeah. Is there something that you could suggest or frame for people that have experienced that? Because I know for me it made me quite angry that I'd felt avoided and unseen and they couldn't just take a moment to go, oh, I'm so sorry, and continue with their day. Is there something that you can suggest to reframe that?
Yes, when that's happened to people I know, it hasn't happened to me. It's happened to me in other ways where something significant might have happened in my life and people actively avoid talking about it. But they say things like, how are you? So then you know that they know about the thing that's happened. There are two things. If somebody actively crosses the road, I would say that is their stuff. That has nothing to do with you, Bianca, and everything to do with them. And it's about their discomfort and often about their worry about getting it wrong and thinking, oh my gosh, and it feels often quite reactive. It's like they've seen you, they're like, I don't know what I'd say, what if I got it wrong? And then they panic. It feels like a very reactive response to me. And so in my kind, compassionate voice, it's about, whatever's going on for them right now, it's really a decision about them and not being able to sit in discomfort or not being able to know how to approach me in a way that feels safe for them. I think often if that's happened to me where I feel like someone might be avoiding me, I might actually be a bit provocative and call out to them. Sometimes I'll go, hey, how you going? And I see their little eyes. Oh, hi, Caroline. How are you? I have done that before.
Of course. I love that you've done.
Of course I have.
Oh my goodness, that is boss. I love that.
Well, then I'm like, no, I don't, don't do that to me. I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
So I have done that. And I have also, when I've known people have understood if I'd have had something going on in my life, they've gone, how are you? I've gone, I am great. I have gone overboard because I'm like, don't, it's okay for you to name the elephant.
Yes.
Yeah, and when it's funny. Or I think about what's within my power of control in those moments. It's my calling out strategy. Or I'll be like, that's so fine. I don't necessarily want to have a conversation with someone that's not ready to have a conversation with me either. And I think it's important, easier said than done, not to personalise it. It's really something that's going on for them. And maybe they don't have strategies around how to talk about really normal human experiences. The other compassionate thought I have as well sometimes is I have heard of experiences where people have also had a loss that's not as known and they're like, I'll make it about me. So I have heard of those stories as well where people have avoided people because they're actually grieving something that's not known. So I also sort of think about that too. There's something going on for them. I'm not going to assume I understand. It feels a bit hurty, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
They're really great pieces of advice. And I always try to think, what is their story? Why have they done that? But I think when you're in those early stages and that happens to you, it can derail your day. It can make you feel so angry that person can't just front up for 5 seconds.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
that's a great framing. And I love the power of control, circle of control sort of concepts of things to remember what we can control, and that's our own emotions and our own thoughts and moods, but we can't control how other people are going to respond, or we can't control what they're going to say or not say.
I also think for those people who might have been the people that have crossed the road, I'd say to them, if it's been more about you just don't have the words, you don't have to solve it. It's really just about saying something like, I'm so sorry for your loss. I just wanted to acknowledge it and we're thinking of you. That is literally the most powerful, beautiful thing, and you don't have to then solve it.
Couldn't agree more.
I think people get caught in that, this is super uncomfortable, I'm going to try and wrap Bianca's grief up with a bow and give it back to her. Don't do that. It's just about going, hey, I'm really sorry. We've been thinking of you.
And that's the thing, isn't it? A lot of people go to that solving, fixing, comforting, warm cuddle mode when nothing will change what's happened. Nothing, you can't go back in time. Yeah, you can't change it. So there's no point in trying to fix anything. You can't fix that person either, because that's the own individual's responsibility to fix themselves, heal themselves. So all you can do is just have a softer landing for people.
Yeah. And I also think we do this, I wonder as well that avoidance is a little bit about, because socially we often go, hey, how are you? Which is what you and I did when we greeted each other. And we often do a rote response, great. We never go, actually, I've had a shocker. But I think when people know there's been significant loss, they can get caught in that, I'm going to say, how are you? And then that's a silly thing to say. But I have literally, knowing all the things I know, I have literally said that to grieving friends, how are you? And then I've corrected myself and gone, that is a stupid thing for Caroline to say. Of course you're not great.
Yep.
Tell me what's been happening. Or
Yes.
it's so lovely to see you, or whatever. So it's okay if you stuff it up, I guess, and then just correct yourself in the moment. I still do that. I'll say, how are you? I'll go, sorry, that's really annoying.
Oh,
Why
I do
did
the same. I know. And I like that. Tell me what's been happening. It's a more easier way probably for that person to process that they can just talk about what has been happening and not have to go into their emotions unless they want to.
Yeah. And then I'll say, we don't have to talk about it either if you don't want to.
Yep.
Tell me about work. You can talk about work, talk about whatever. Yeah.
Oh, and I love that. That reminds me. I loved that when people gave me that option. They're like, if you want to talk about it, if you don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
There was a certain point where I was like, I am sick of talking about my own shit. I want to hear someone else's gossip. I want to hear someone else's stuff.
Yeah.
I just want to feel normal, whatever normal is, quote unquote, whatever that is. So distract me for a bit.
Yeah. We've had friends that we've done that. We've just met and we've just talked rubbish. And then we've later gone, was that okay? And she's like, oh, so nice.
Yeah. And I think you've got a certain inner circle that provides that comfort for you. Yeah. You don't want there's certain people that you wouldn't want to just
Yes, true. You'd be like, no, don't do that.
You know.
I loved in the story how she was very generous in talking about her ways of coping that weren't helpful. So when she talked about having the whiskey, but being really insightful around knowing when that was becoming a bit more unhealthy, because I think there are moments in grief where you just think, I just want to switch it off. You know, it'd be nice if we had different switches for different emotions, but I think when you switch your emotions off, they all go off. You lose contact with all of them. You don't get to choose which one you lose contact with, and alcohol definitely can do that, and drugs and other substances can definitely do that. So you can understand it. There are times where you just want to be able to put that grief down and not be in contact with it, and I think that's a really normal human experience, and I think it's important we find ways of doing that are healthy, whether that's, as we spoke about before, sitting with a group of friends where you're just lost in gossip for half an hour about anything and everything else. I think sometimes those things that have addictive qualities can be really easy to fall into, and I think it's important to be mindful of that for sure.
And I guess it's being kinder to yourself in not judging or not being shameful about that you needed to have a drink, because my God, did I need to have plenty of drinks, like it was just, it's a survival, it's a coping
Yep, and
mechanism.
I think that can be part of culture. Certainly alcohol is a big part of Australian culture, I would say. And I think it's just important to be mindful of it, because we also know that alcohol can be a depressant. So, it's not great, but it's also understandable in terms of those social norms and cultural things that we do. But be really mindful of doing that every so often rather than every night. Yeah,
there's certainly a threshold, but I love how you framed it, that it was a really generous way of looking at what alcohol did for her, and it gave her a moment to just breathe.
Yeah, definitely. And she's obviously incredibly reflective and insightful, and so she was able to think about what that sort of pattern looked like for her, and I think can look like lots of people. You do hear about those things. But I think it's important to think about what are some of the ways that I can sort of just put that grief down and just take a brain break if you can, because it can be very hard to do, can't it?
And I think maybe as a finishing note that the judgment that we have for people that have addiction, have substance use disorders, they didn't choose. I would hazard a guess that 99.999% did not choose to become that way. They were wanting to feel or numb something, and it got out of control, and they didn't have great support mechanisms. They didn't have any other coping strategy to be able to cease that.
Yeah, and I think there's still, unfortunately, a lot of stigma around addiction, and I agree. I think it's important that we have compassionate thoughts about that rather than ones that are judgmental and rigid.
Caroline, thank you so much. I think finishing on having more compassionate thoughts, I think in the world that we're living in at the moment. We all need to have far more compassionate thoughts. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Bianca.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is dedicated to my son Herbert and to all the fellow grievers out there. I'm sorry that you're here. Be kind to others, but mostly to yourself. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to mention that whilst I do have a degree in behavioural science and have spent years educating myself and researching the topics of trauma and mental health, I'm not a licensed therapist, counsellor or psychologist. Everything I share here is based on personal experience and things I've learnt through education. This podcast is for informational or entertainment purposes only and isn't the substitute for professional advice. If you're struggling, please reach out to a GP or a qualified therapist. You're not alone and there is help available.